I am now recording, so just make sure that whatever you say, you don't mind being recorded and posted. So, you know, we all have to watch our P's and Q's a little bit while we have that on. But joking aside, you know, we have the content here. If you are unable to attend a seminar, what will happen is once our seminars are over and we've reviewed the content that we've gotten through, I'll post a seminar option 2 for those who couldn't come. And you'll have the seminar to review and then questions to answer about the content from our meeting. So if you're here, you get the 10 points, but if you're not, you have to do that in order to get those points. Ben, you're smiling. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Your hair looks exactly the same, whether you come to in-person class or online, huh? And I'm saying that as I look like this, so I shouldn't really pick at you.
I got up
in glass houses or in quarantine, right? Shouldn't pick at people.
Wait, why am I admin?
What's that, Carol?
Yes. He just asked if he's at the admin, and I said yes.
I don't know why.
Like that happened with our other meeting too.
Yeah, I don't know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're in charge.
Awesome.
So Ben, go ahead and take over then.
Right. All right, everybody. So we're finishing up today. It was a good class. See you guys all next Monday.
We're done.
You know, it's nice to still have the laughs. Corey, how are you doing? You're quiet.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
As good as one can be trapped in the house.
Yeah. Jean, you're here too. Hello.
Hi. Morning.
Morning, Lou.
Hello, I'm here. No
Wonderful.
video apparently, but I'm here.
You can get video. Let me show
We
you.
need to see your face.
Here, hold on. I'll show you how you get video.
Oh, it's just my computer, but I'll figure it out.
Uh-oh. Oh, I see. I can't do that. Never mind.
Oh, this is the screen share. Oh, you. Oh, okay. I see what you're doing.
If you just scroll down, like I can't show you with mine, but if you take your arrow and just kind of scroll down under your own picture,
It's just
the
because my
mute button
webcam
is,
doesn't work.
next to it is also the video if you want to show yourself. And then I also see that we have another arrival. Where'd Lucas go? Oh, there's Lucas.
Yeah, I just turned my video on there.
Oh, hey Lucas. You and Ben
Hello.
look like brothers today with your bed head.
Why is that? Oh yeah, yep. Here we go.
Okay, so you all received credit for being here. Congratulations, you win. But we also have a discussion this week, and so I want to I'm going to share my screen with you so that I can kind of go through this with you. So you can see my the module, right? The classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And you see I've gone into our discussion. If I go back in here in week 10, that's open for you. You've got these resources. I don't expect that you're going to have them all done by Tuesday, obviously, but by Wednesday, you should be able to answer the questions. And I might make this Thursdays because, you know, we're all in quarantine. So I try to give you a question here, discussion question that gets you thinking about primary versus secondary resources. So in our readings this week, you've got some primary sources actually supposedly recorded from Indigenous voices at the time of Western European invasion. How is that for a term? You like that better than First Contacts or Columbian Exchange?
Yes.
I like that better. I'm going to write that down, try to keep that in my
Bit
head.
more fitting.
Right, yeah, you know, so maybe we'll call it. But yeah, Western European invasion. And so here we start to look at, you know, what does the voice look like from the inside versus the outside, and we're starting to apply the actual content. So, you know, again, in this class, part of my goal is to get you thinking about what it is to think about history. Carol's doing this all the time in her local history research, right? Carol, can you speak a little bit, if you don't mind, about like the exploration of becoming a historian?
Oh, well, first of all, I'll just say that I never liked history in school. I never took a history course if I didn't have to. And it was actually Alyssa who got me excited about history. And this is my second college course since my earlier days when I did take a Western civilization course. And just, what was the question? that by being exposed, by being exposed in the way that, yeah, well, yeah, I've been doing a project trying to identify the people of color in Greenfield, and I just get more excited by the day because I keep finding new stuff. And to find the primary sources are especially helpful if you can get your hands on them. But I also have been going in these kind of circuitous routes to try to find out who is it related to whom, and maybe where did they live, and where did they work, and how were these relationships all interwoven. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Well, you know, I kind of put you on the
You're not
spot there,
smiling.
so that's fine, you know. You know, what I'm thinking about here is, as we're talking about Indigenous history, and we've been thinking this whole time about how we approach it, right? And so, like, when you're talking about like local history, there's a certain approach there. When you're working in the archives and you're working with primary sources and you're dealing with like interviews of people, that kind of history and the collection of it requires that you're thinking about history in a certain way. Does that make sense?
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking. Yeah, critical thinking about the information that you're getting, right? And then also, you know, trying to understand the relationship of what you have, the information that you have to the actual community you're talking about. So that's kind of what this Native American calling link here. Let me share my screen with you again. There we go. That's what the Native American calling was about. And then, or the setting the record straight here. So I want to go into this a little bit more, but before we do, I want to switch over to your view, and I'm going to show you, here it is. I have put into our classroom at the bottom of what you see here, which is after our class today, I put in information about the virtual presentations. Remember, we're not going to be doing face-to-face panel presentations now. Instead, you're going to be doing Zoom. Hopefully, you'll share your screen and you'll do a presentation on your own wiki. And again, wikis are great because it gives you a chance to kind of collect information, and it's a project that you can use to show your ability to work online as you move forward in your education. So our weekly Zoom meetings have been logged, and the link down here, if you're ever like, I don't know how to get in this week, it's always this link, all right? It's just a repeating link. So we have that. So because again, that we're not meeting for our panels face-to-face, you'll be doing a virtual exhibit. And I went online to the, Museum of Native American History, and I looked at their virtual exhibits. And I found it to be kind of interesting. The Inca universe here, you've got some information, you've got a reflection of the past with a link with the audio and an interview here. I thought this was a kind of an interesting way to approach doing a wiki. Well, there's a little bit of, there's a visual here, and then there's some content. You need the visual to go along with your presentation. So I'm thinking that we might say that you should have 2 or 3 images, trying to make them primary sources, and then content that, you know, is about like this. I don't want you to, you know, go out of your way. If you want to add extra, you know, pages that go along with the content that you're presenting in your review, you're more than welcome to, but I'm not going to require that much of you. But I want you to learn how to use these wikis. So when you go into the virtual presentations link and you click on your, oopsies, and you click on rather your individual virtual research project, when you open this up, it'll be yours and yours only. Lucas won't be able to go into Lou's, and Lou's can't go into Ben's. And so here you begin to navigate the page, and you'll start by editing here. right? And I'm asking you to remove this prompt and this picture, and then go from there. If you want to add more pages, as this one has here, where you click from page to page, to do that, you would put in these, and then you would put in the name of your next page, right? Next page here. Close the columns, or whatever you call those, and then you save this, right? And then once you've saved that, then you have the next page here, and you would create that page. So that's how you begin to build your wiki, okay? One thing that I found is that you can't copy and paste. You can't go online, find a picture, copy it, and paste it in. Instead, you do have to save it, right? And then enter that. So you would go open this up. If you wanted to insert a picture, you'd have to go in and choose a file. So any pictures that you want to put in here, you're going to have to save to your computer to add. All right. So you can start working on that, and be creative with it. I want to put some parameters around the content, but I don't want to put too much, because, you know, the virtual presentation is just taking the place of the panel conversation. The panel conversations, and those, you were really only asked to talk about your content, and you need a visual though to go along with it. So I think 2 or 3 pictures, and then just a couple paragraphs of content that go along, I think will be good. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Sounds good to me.
What?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. And the reason I'm checking in with you and all of this is because this is a tough time. I don't want to overwhelm anybody with work. So, you know, if the workload is, you know, seems overwhelming, let me know and we can talk about it. Okay?
So along with like the project and then the historiography, we do this as the final piece, right? So this is what we'd be presenting?
Right.
Okay.
So you submit to me the historiography, the research paper, and your reflection.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But then, you know, because we're not having panels, and I don't want to make it more confusing than it has to be, so
Yeah.
individuals will just present their own findings for like 10, 15 minutes.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so having a visual to go along with that, I think, is useful. And then learning to work in wikis is a good skill set.
Okay.
And then one more thing, you can still see my classroom, right? Our classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Boop. Oh, it's all the way down here at the bottom. There's also this great little, you know, how to use Wiki for students. So I would start by reviewing this. And then, you know, I can help answer any questions that you have, but it's really important in this environment that you become more autodidactic, right? Do you know what that means?
Study by myself.
Sorry, what is that?
Study by ourselves.
Exactly, right? It means that you become a motivated learner, and you have to, you don't have to, but you start to self-teach yourself by doing proper research. So I'm not saying you can't ask me questions, because you can always ask me questions. But I'm going to start asking you back questions like, well, what have you done to find the answer to that? All right. And the reason I'm doing that is because that is what a successful student does. So if you're like, I don't know how this wiki works, and YouTube is quite available to you, and I'm pretty sure that some of you spend, you know, time on YouTube watching all kinds of how-to videos, right? Try to do some research and do some self-learning. And because, you know, we might be in this environment for, you know, until the end of April, but we're not going back into the classroom at GCC until at least the fall. And, you know, frankly, if there is a spike that occurs in the fall, you know, we could be looking at being in an online environment for, you know, even the whole year in some cases. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if that's the case, then one of the most successful tools an online student can learn is to be autodidactic. So lots of things I want you to learn and know. Phew, what questions do you have so far?
I just miss the information of how much pages should we made on the wiki. Yeah, I lose the
You only have to have one page.
one page.
I'll write this out for you, but one page, 2 or 3 visuals, and 2 or 3 paragraphs of content. If you want to be more substantial, right? If you want the visual to be a larger part of your presentation, by all means, add more pages and add more content. I think the more that you do in a wiki will only build your skill set, and you'll have a product that you can then, again, show an employer to say, I've built these wikis, here's what content looks like that I've created online. So, you've got 2 different examples of virtual museum exhibits in our class. You have the one that I just showed you, which is from the Native American Museum in DC, which is here. And then also at the top of our class, in the virtual symposiums, I've given you another example, right? So there's 2 different examples to look at there. Besides giving you some examples and just making it a very, very generalized what I'm expecting, I want to leave it open because I want you to use your own creativity. And I don't want to apply my understanding of what that means to you. I think it's important, especially now, for us to have creative outlets. So I'm hoping that this will become one for you. Okay. Carol, how's your shoulder?
I have one. It's still there. My arm is still hanging from it.
Yeah.
So, it's fine. It's fine. I can sleep at night, and that's what's important.
Yeah, and I woke
It
up
may
this
get
morning with
fixed
mine
someday.
hurting. Huh?
Did you? I think someone said something else, but anyway, I had one more question
Yeah,
for you, if you don't mind, about the wiki. I'm sorry about your shoulder.
that's fine.
And that is, for the images, do we have to have citations at the bottom of the wiki where the sources are?
Yes, you want to cite to your resources.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, so I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to share that with you. And we shall go from there. Let me see. I want to share this screen. There we go. So you had a lot of different resources to look at. And again, I don't expect that, by Tuesday you've gone through them all. But instead, what I want to think about is, again, what these terms look like and what this experience was for Indigenous nations, and think of the question like why? Why is it that, there's estimates that up to 150 million Indigenous peoples died with the Western European invasion and genocide. Now, the majority of those were from viruses, which I'm sure is something that makes us uncomfortable to think about today, right? But even in that, there was intention. When Christopher Columbus first landed in the Bahamas and came across the Arawaks, if you haven't had a chance to yet, when you start reviewing the Howard Zinn chapter 1 of People's History, right, the Columbus and early contacts or early encounters, you'll read these primary sources that Howard Zinn uses in his review. But it shows that Columbus came in with the intention of finding this gold and this silver. And when it was apparent that that wasn't going to be something that was quickly discovered, he just immediately defaults to imprisoning and enslaving people. And he wrote out these narratives. We can look at those to understand the conquistadors' perspective, right? Obviously. We can look at that through the lens of Spanish biases, and we can think about what that means. But we can also consider the fact that Columbus was writing all this down, so by the time that Cortez goes into the Aztec Empire, he could go in with just a small group of people, some blankets with measles, right? And because of what he learned from Christopher Columbus's narratives and experiences, a small group of people can dominate, right? Come to dominate the entire Aztec Empire, and very quickly. So, you know, it may be that we don't want to think about the ways in which these histories have been taught and what primary sources look like when they're from the European perspective. It's important to understand. When I was in South Florida in my undergraduate, you know, we were working with, I had a Florida history class in my history course. And we talked about like First Peoples, and the Calusa were the first peoples in like the Everglades. And what I love about this story about the Calusa, you see this picture here, right? What do you see in this picture? Celine, what do you see in this picture?
A lot of fighting and war. Just
a lot of fighting and war. Okay.
Many.
Highlight on the guns.
Yeah, specifically. It's basically one side has like a bunch of advanced tech and the other side is like fighting with sticks, basically, and nothing else.
Right. And look at the size of the people who are fighting with sticks. What do you see here when it comes to like the size?
Yeah, so they kind of make them out to look like cavemen.
Cavemen, and much larger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason that they did that, and there's no evidence that Calusa were any larger than Spanish people at that time, but Ponce de Leon first came into contact with the Calusa, and in his first attempts, he was pushed back, right? The Calusa actually fought them off. So when that narrative was written down and it was recorded, right, all of a sudden the Calusa are giants. Barbaric giants. The Calusa men were tall and well built with long hair. Calusa means fierce people, and they described as a fierce warlike people. Many smaller tribes were consistently watching for those murdering warriors. The first Spanish explorers found that these Indians were not very friendly. All right. The explorers soon became the targets of the Calusa attacks. This tribe was the first one that the Spanish explorers wrote home about in 1513. This is on the USF's website about the Calusa. So what kind of narrative do you see playing out here?
I mean, I'm seeing that it's kind of changing the story, right? It's like you go to invade and it fails. So instead of saying, oh, you know, we went here and we failed, they're very dangerous, like probably shouldn't go there again. It's more like, no, they were barbaric, like it was their fault, kind of that whole kind of thing, right?
Good, yeah. So, you know, we go in understanding that as soon as we have this, Western European invasion, that in fact, the narratives will be different. So we looked at Howard Zinn. You'll be looking at that this week. If you're not familiar with Howard Zinn, if you haven't been in my classes before, you may not be, but it's a great book. It's a free text about U.S. history, and I do encourage you to take a look at it, beyond just the first chapter. But he talked about Columbus's explorations to the west. And he says that Columbus and his sailors came ashore carrying swords, speaking oddly. The Iroquois ran out to greet them, brought them food, water, and gifts. We know about this reciprocity, right? This sharing of indigenous cultures. And what did Columbus say in return? They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears, and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and the hawk's bells. They traded willingly everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. I don't know about that. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all. So when we see primary sources like this, obviously we know we have to look to the other perspective and we have to understand where it's coming from. Columbus, as soon as I arrived in the Indies and the first island, which I found, I took some of the natives by force, right? Otherwise enslaving them. The first to cite land was supposed to get a yearly pension of 10,000, but Rodrigo, right, never got it. Columbus claimed it for himself. So, you know, we see what kind of character comes out, and all of this should be playing a role. They came for gold, but they did not find any large quantities. They had to fill up the ships returning to Spain with some kind of dividend. So they went on great slave raids. Okay, so when we talk about, you know, these first invasions, we're talking about a death rate as high as 95%. So what does that do to culture?
It basically destroys it, right? Like if
Right.
you're getting rid of all the stuff and all the culture, like that's how either languages or stories die. If you kill the only people that know them and there's no, you know, nothing written down, nothing stored, it just disappears because that was it, right?
Mhm.
It also puts the people into survival mode. So somebody looking on the outside would just see chaos when it's not the norm.
Yeah, Lou, that's a really good point because, you know, as people are recording these stories, if they're seeing that kind of reaction and we're not looking at things from a social justice perspective, the first thing that's going to kick in is what's the dysfunction within this group, right? Not the pressures, not looking at what are the pressures that are causing these actions. And so for us, we want to make sure that we're always looking at that. And we're looking to primary sources that come from inside the culture to understand. We read the history books given to children in the United States, right? We see this heroification. We talked about this. And one of the good examples that I like to use about the fact that, you know, these narratives have shifted so much from reality is like the cruel policy, even when you have a historian who talks about these actions, talks about these atrocities, how are they talking about it? Right? The cruel policy initiated by Columbus and pursued by his successors resulted in complete genocide. This is like one of the premier authors, Samuel Eliot from Harvard, right? No less, distinguished writer on Columbus. He acknowledges here the cruel policy initiated by Columbus and pursued by his successors resulted in complete genocide. It's on page 1 of this book. But then buried halfway between the grand telling, he says, right, in the book's last paragraph, he had his faults and his defects, but they were largely the defects of the qualities that made him great. His indomitable will, his superb faith in God and his mission as the Christ bearer. But there was no flaw, no dark side of the most outstanding and essential qualities of him as a seaman. So when we see those kind of framings, right, it's important to remember, you know, who is the author here? This was, you know, a military historian, first off, and nothing against military historians, but military historians tell a traditional story, right? And they tell it from the perspective of like government, and that does play into creating a bias and a lens. So Morrison doesn't ignore Columbus's actions here. It does not omit the story of mass murder, but, you know, it's a quiet omission that takes place in the risk and discovery, right? State the facts, however, and then to bury them in a mass of information is to say the reader, right, with a certain infectious calm, yes, mass murder took place, but it's not what is important. You following me here?
Yep.
Yes.
So I think I like my the Western European invasion. All right, we talked about what cultural exchange and the Columbian exchange, what that means for us. But do we call it genocide? Do we call what happened genocide?
Usually it's not referred to that way, at least from what I've heard.
Ah, it hasn't been referred to that way. Ben, is it genocide what happened?
I mean, I'd say yes.
Well, I mean, if it was mostly from disease, you
Yeah, but
know,
it was intention, but they intentionally like gave them disease. That's the thing. It's not like they were like directly killing them, but they kind of did.
It's
You know what I mean?
biological warfare. It still counts as like they're
But-
biological weapons. It still counts.
Yeah.
here's the thing, right? Here's the problem with that argument. You know, if the Europeans are coming, right, and they're going to colonize, the disease was going to come. It didn't matter if they brought blankets or not. I mean, they were coming. And so, as we're seeing, a pandemic can fly through.
Yeah, but they also had the intent of like taking over their like civilization, basically.
Yeah, and looking at the definition too, like it says the deliberate killing, and they deliberately did it.
So my devil's advocate there are like some of the large usual arguments you find, right, in defense of undermining the idea of genocide. So if we expand the historical story, right, to think about this in a larger perspective, then yeah, it definitely becomes about that. So I don't know if you had a chance to listen to this yet. I would like to pull it up. I don't know if you can hear on my computer. I'm hoping you can. Can you hear this?
Very, very faintly.
Just kinda.
Kind of.
Yeah, there. It's pretty low.
Okay, hold on. I wonder if it's coming. Oh, wait. I wonder if I can. Let's try this. Let me just try making it loud. Okay. Is that any better?
Nope.
Can't hear
Not
the
really.
words.
What if
Okay,
you shared the page instead of the PowerPoint?
Oh yeah.
Is that better?
Nope.
Mm-mm.
Dang.
Yeah, try that. Maybe sharing the page.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be good.
Oh,
That was a good
yeah.
idea.
Look at you being all smart about things.
that was him.
Okay.
Nope.
No.
Mm-mm.
I think we're hearing it through your computer, not the thing itself.
Hold on, one more time, one more thing. Not any better? Okay. Well, that's unfortunate because then we can't listen to this together. All right. So, if we can't listen to it together, then what I want you to do is go in at 6 minutes. And I want you to listen for the first minute and a half.
Right now?
Yeah, put your microphone on Zoom on mute, and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go into the chat. I'm going to post in here for you the link. So we'll mute our pages. You back?
I'm here.
So think about that question. Have you been in a situation where what you're being taught is not pairing up with what you know, or is it conflicting?
Well, for me personally, a lot of classes, definitely if it's a different teacher, at least what they focus on is very different. You know, I could learn about American history up to the Civil War, and for one teacher, a lot of it will be about the establishment of slavery, the slave trade, all that. And then for another teacher, it will focus directly on like American politics and George Washington and all that. And so they're showing the same time of history, but what they focus on makes it completely two different narratives. Um, and so that's kind of the most I see and then it gets to the extreme where like specific people will be discussed in different ways. You know, one teacher will say, you know, George Washington was a great guy or whatever, and then the other one will be like, well, there were stories of him being in the corner watching kids play, and it was like weird or whatever. Um, and these stories will give dramatically different experiences on what the person wants. And so I feel like when that comes up, it's important to be like, well, I've heard this or that, but I've done that once or twice, and the teacher usually doesn't. Well, at least in high school, the teachers didn't really like that too much. I never was like the type where you know, I never said they were wrong. Obviously, I'm the student here, but
So
like
the teachers didn't like it when you challenged them.
I didn't necessarily. I wasn't even challenging them. That's what's funny. I was just saying like, oh, I heard this story or whatever, and I feel like this is a different type of take on it, and it would not. Well, not every teacher, but I had one that was like that. Yeah.
Um, Anybody else have any experiences in the classroom where there's been a disagreement? Maybe what is being taught contradicts with your understanding of something?
I remember I was in a class where I had learned a concept in a previous class. It was an English class, and then I went to a philosophy class, and it was a completely different approach on this. There was completely different um, take on this one concept, and it was. I still don't know where I stand now on this particular idea, but I definitely brought up my disagreement.
Good. It's important that you feel that you can do that.
Yeah.
So how do you respond? Do you argue back? Do you say anything? And so I want you to go in and listen to Chatanabog, who is the speaker. So she's an Indigenous female. She's in this U.S. history class, and the professor is saying that I think she raised the issue of like Native American, death was a genocide. The professor says that he doesn't like to use that word genocide when talking about Native Americans, right? And so she wants to address her concerns with him. And she does the right thing, I think, because she goes home and she does her own research. And she comes back in and she's prepared now to, I guess I can share the screen again. She's prepared now to talk about that. And let's go to 822 of the, stop again. There we go. Ugh, this is driving me nuts. Okay. 822 here, setting the record straight, and I can share that screen with you if you want me to. And we're gonna listen, I think it's for 2 minutes this time. Okay?
That isn't factual. That's not right.
Oh, wow.
And then I proceeded to ask him to clarify the statement that he made on Wednesday about the fact that he doesn't like to use the word genocide because it implies that it was a purposeful decimation, and that natives were wiped out by European diseases only. And I said, why did you say that?
And what was his response?
Oh, sorry.
And what was his response?
Someone just had a great mic and was like sharing the audio pretty well, I thought. Was that you, Joshua?
No, I had myself muted. I think it's just that their speakers are probably pretty loud, and you can
Oh, that's
hear it
amazing.
pretty
I wish
well.
we had that. Okay, so Chichanabad, does her research. She comes back in, she presents evidence to this professor. He's shutting her down, right? She goes to leave. She's being forced out of the room. And then if you listen further, and I hope you continue to listen to this for your reflection for the discussion, she talks about how, no one else said anything. And then I think that there were a few students who talked to her afterwards. There was an experience that I had on campus where a student had a problem, had been in a classroom, and the conversation, she was like one of the only students of color in the room. And she became very uncomfortable with the content, and basically was told that she could leave as well. And this was this past year at GCC. And afterwards, a bunch of students from the classroom came to her and they were like, oh, I agree with you. I agree with you, right? You were right. But none of them spoke up. None of them said anything, on her behalf, or not even her behalf, but, from their own perspective and thoughts about that. So, what does full agency look like that, right? But then what I wanted to think about is, well, how do we engage? You heard about the bystander, right? Bystander, what's it called?
Bystander effect?
The bystander effect, right? Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, the one example that I know is the situation where, like, for example, if there's like an emergency or something and you just shout, call 911, everybody thinks that somebody else did it. But you have to go to one person and you say, hey, call 911. But it's really just an effect where if something bad is happening, many people, most of the time, assume that somebody else is going to fix that problem.
Have you ever been in a situation where someone else is, experiencing something like Chichanabad had, and did you act?
Are you asking me personally or the
I'm
class?
asking the class, not you. I'm not
Okay.
pointing you.
I guess I had a situation once where I was leaving a bank, a small branch office, and people were coming and going. And as I was going out the door, I was meeting other people, and people were driving in and everything. And I looked, and on the curb were sitting two individuals who were elderly, and I couldn't figure out why they were sitting there, and people were walking by. And so I stopped and I said, do you want to be down there? So this is a little different kind of example, but it was an example where the man had fallen and pulled the woman with him. And she said, no, we can't get up. He was 90, she was in her 80s. So that was not a perfect example, but it was a situation where people were all figuring somebody else was going to address the problem if it were a problem.
If it were a problem. I think in our different societies, here in New England, we kind of tend to mind our own business, right? And respect everybody's space or whatever. So that might play a role in it as well, like these social norms. But what you do, I think, is important. If just think about the next time that you're in a situation and someone else needs that additional voice, or someone should speak out against, right, what's happening. if you can, you want to do that. And we'll go over a few ways that that can happen where you can be, you know, an engaged bystander. So I think it's important to do that. Let me just see if I can go back up here. Okay, never mind. So the professor said that, you know, the Portuguese were brave, strong, ambitious men. And just talked about it from that perspective, this Western European invasion, right? There's a lot that's left out, right? Is that a balanced narrative, an approach to the narrative?
No.
No.
No, pretty clear, right? So let's go back into our audio, and I won't make this a class exercise again until I know that I can share my audio with you some way that's effective. But what was the true impact of telling your story? I want you to listen to 1.5 minutes at 15:45, and just remember to mute yourself.
Describe what happened to Native Americans. People weighed in on their thoughts, and it's interesting, a lot of people started sharing their own stories of facing similar moments. And Chitanaba,
Can hear you. Can you mute yourselves, please?
Happen next. What do you feel was the true impact of telling your story?
Jajin, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah, I can hear now.
What you referenced, you know, people started talking about stories.
Please mute yourself.
Happen to them, things that they had wished that they spoke up about, but didn't until then.
Okay. So what is Chipalaban saying is the outcome of sharing her story and standing up for herself there?
A lot more people are also doing it.
Right.
It's kind of one, it's a domino effect.
Sharing my screen again. Confusing. Okay. So what are these oppressions and these microaggressions and these macroaggressions, right? Do you see them playing out in your education or in spaces in which you usually are navigating? Cole, I haven't heard from you.
I'm just listening.
Well, I think these do play out, but we also have a tendency to surround ourselves with people who are more like-minded, and so maybe
Right.
it's a little harder to think of them.
Go to minute 25 now. I'm sorry that we're doing it this way, but go to minute 25. And there's 2 minutes, there's a 2 minutes there. Remember to mute yourself. So we're talking about here, this, what we are taught and how we're taught, and how we make these kind of changes. Do you agree that the kind of changes that Chanaba is talking about here has to come from within the communities themselves, or can we from outside of those communities also be supportive?
I think it's a stronger message when you have it coming from inside of the communities.
Mhm.
But it definitely deserves the help from the others outside, and everybody else reinforcing that.
So have you experienced anything similar to this?
Me?
Anybody? I had experiences when I was in my undergraduate. It was around the time of 9/11, so things were already kind of tense. I might have mentioned this. And, professors were wearing American flags on everyone had an American flag. And so then students began wearing flags from their own countries. And there was 38, South American countries just to begin with. And there became this contention about, who could wear a flag. And professors were trying to force students to take off flags that weren't American flags. And so finally the administration said, no one can wear flags. And that rippled back down into our classroom. And I had a constitutional history class. And I remember the professor there was one student who had I don't remember where he's from. I don't want to lie. But he was adamant that, this is my right to have this flag as well. And so he became a target of that professor, and the professor would stand in front of him and just shoot him question after question after question, just trying to, just to bait him down. And yeah, I spoke out against that. And then I went and I complained to the dean about it, you know, because I thought it was something that wasn't appropriate, wasn't fair, and wasn't kind. Would you ever go to those steps if you saw something that you thought wasn't appropriate?
The worry with like academic environments is, you know, a lot of students kind of want to go with the flow because, you know, the teacher, hopefully in no world would the teacher actually grade you different or like penalize you, but obviously in your situation they did. But that's the worry in every student's mind. If I speak up, if I say something that the teacher doesn't like, will they punish me in some way, even subconsciously, even if the teacher is like consciously like okay with it? Unconsciously, are they going to be more critical towards my work if I disagree with them? And I've seen this with, again, in high school. I've seen students who completely flip opinions based on the teacher. It's not even their fault. It's just something we could do without even thinking. Because they are in a position of authority. They are a position where they are grading us. We're not grading them. We're not having control over the situation. So it's very easy to kind of go into that situation where you're like, I don't personally think that way, but I'm not going to say anything because of X, Y, and Z, you know. They have control, their position of power. They're supposed to have more knowledge than me. They've spent their life, hopefully, researching the subject. What do I have to add to it? So, yeah.
So it can be hard to intervene then because of, you know, concerns for the repercussions and retaliation. Incidentally, that's why retaliation is considered another violation of civil rights laws. If you know, discriminate and then you retaliate when someone tries to stop the discrimination, that's a different, you know, charge. But that's because it happens a lot, right? But I want us to think about what it means to be an empowered bystander. That was the term I was trying to figure out. Well, what does it mean to be an empowered bystander? And I do this slide by slide, but this computer situation is so kind of confusing. An empowered bystander is someone who witnesses potentially harmful behavior and takes action to create a positive outcome. And, you know, what is our responsibility? What is our role in community? You know, when it comes to this, that's an ethical question that you have to kind of navigate on your own. But the process of liberation, right, for us, is once we start to see where we have power or the impediments to that, when we're able to like identify our own, then we're able to witness others and intervene on their behalf. And I'm not saying that you have to like physically create an altercation. It's a situation by situation, right, case scenario. But, you know, you can delay and check in, you know, with someone afterwards. That is more, that's better than nothing, right? That does show someone that you are, you know, in support there. You can try to distract in these moments. So if you see an altercation coming where you see that, you know, there's an imbalance, maybe you don't want to directly address it because you're concerned of retaliation, but if you could then change the subject and, you know, change the focus, then that can help the perpetuator of the harassment or of the inappropriate, you know, have a chance to think about what they're doing and hopefully, you know, end it there. You can contact other people. You know, for the student that was at our campus, you know, she came to me because she knew I was her ally, as I am for all of you, right? And that I would protect her and I would not betray her trust, and I would get her to the right and the proper avenues for addressing it. And so we did that. I walked with her to the dean's office and we addressed them specifically. And then I followed back up to make sure that it had been addressed, even though it was not my class, right? And of course, it's easy for me to say from this position, right, as you know, a chair. So obviously, I understand the power dynamics there. And I'm not saying put yourself at risk, but when there are moments when we can engage with each other, right, it's important to do so. You can even address the perpetrator, but you want to be careful. So I'm using this time, not to go through the tedium of looking at every detail of what genocide looked like in the Americas, because it was a genocide, like you've said, right? It was an intentional attack for the usurpation of land and resources. So we don't have to hash all that out in here, but we can think about what it means to understand those narratives and what it means, for students like Japanabad, who's actually experienced that recently in history, or recently in her class, in her history class, what it looks like to be in those situations and think about, preparing ourselves. Part of what we can learn from history is a better sense of human experience and human action, right? And hopefully we learn, a morality and ethics about social justice that helps us become more warriors than observers. So what do you think? We have a few more minutes together. What do you think?
I'd like to see, as a Chinese, when our peers talking about the situation, whether they have the right to express their own opinion in a very kind of risky environment, compared to the two country in China, the situation, I always think everybody in as American student has a very fortunate situation to have this kind of NPR channel to express their situation. But in China, there's only one correct answer you must write down. There's only one correct answer in every history test, in every political test, and in some public speaking. So when you to fight for more rights and more social equality, but compared to other countries, people who live in America is very fortunate already, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I think the fact that we have like the freedom of speech, we are just so fortunate to have it, to where we can have situations where even though somebody may be, there may be a situation with a professor or something like that, that students are in one way or another able to get their words out and able to voice what's going on, and eventually it will catch on.
Very nice. I agree. Who else? Cole, can you speak to us now about this?
I mean, yeah, I think that to connect with Jiajing, like about like not like being able to speak out, like we're fortunate that we have like the right to, but I think that like nowadays with like the media and how much it is, like we get fed too much information to the point where we don't know what is right and what is wrong. Like specifically about this coronavirus and everything like that. So, and we get so many different news channels and so many different like people saying different things that we don't know what is right and what's wrong. And that's kind of like the pros and cons of it, I guess.
Well, I think it's a really good point. And I think that if we go back to earlier in the audio, and it probably made more sense if you listen to it all the way through, but when the professor first made those statements about this not being a genocide, Japanabad did not immediately, address him. She said she went home and she did her research, and she did proper academic research, right? And beyond academic. And she came back in prepared to present her findings and her understanding from her own perspective as well. Any professor should listen and make space for that, A, right? But B, it's a very good example. Cole, like you're saying, I mean, there's so much conflicting information that we're getting. And if we swallow everything and then begin to try to defend it, by tomorrow we'll be embarrassed by what we said. But when we're talking about, these ideas of social justice constraints, when we talk about history classes, when we talk about witnessing, this kind of power struggle or this kind of undermining of someone's voice, maybe we don't say something, but maybe if we're equipped with, a better knowledge or a knowledge base, a better, grounding in what social justice looks like, then maybe we can speak out. Carol?
How did you know I wanted to say something?
I don't know, you've been you just keep popping up, so yeah.
Oh, I do? Oh, maybe I'm sitting too close. I don't know.
I just think you want to say something, I see it.
Well, it kind of feeds into what you were just saying, and that is, I did watch Setting the Wreckage Straight. In fact, I watched it twice, or didn't watch it, I listened to it, sorry. And I made a big note because toward the very end, a native person comes on named Natani Means, and talks about being in a class, and they were going to do a history project on Andrew Jackson, and he refused to participate in the debate. I don't want to spoil it all, but anyway, it got me to thinking about the value of an authentic voice. And when you are in a classroom and someone is in the classroom who is a receiver, that we need to listen to these people. Not that they can't not inform us correctly, but those voices are important, and that's what I just wanted to add. It fed into what you said.
Ben.
Yeah.
Would you speak up?
I mean, I don't really have anything to add.
I mean,
to
as
this
a bystander,
conversation,
would you
right?
speak up?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant speak up. Okay. No, yes, I would.
Lucas?
Sorry, my bad.
Yes.
No, I thought. Yes, I would.
What about you, Lucas?
I guess it's one thing that I got from the podcast was, if I had just heard of this story, that would be one thing. But one of the things, when I listen to it, you can hear how nervous this person is, and it's so apparent how much she was shaken up by this, and it just really I guess I don't necessarily have a lot of answers, but I just came away from it with a lot of questions about how do we want to make sure academic debate is cordial and honest and not dedicated to necessarily this kind of combative debate style of the professor. Not that debate is we need it, but yeah. So that's those are the questions that I took away from that. Just how do we make it happen moving forward?
And it could be the professor. It could also be students. I've had students who are pretty dominating. And then they they go on some rants, and you're like, uh-oh, right?
Yeah.
How can I rein them back in?
Yeah.
But I think it takes a community, and so again, we're going through this Indigenous history. We're taking these perspectives because I think it's the most respectful way to do it, to walk through it as people who are outside of the community. So it also gives us a brilliant chance to think about the frameworks of education, to think about the frameworks of historical inquiry. And all of that, as Carol clearly stated earlier, is about critical thinking. And so at the end of the day, the skill sets that we build here are about critical thinking. But hopefully it's also about empowerment for yourself, and empowerment in your voice for yourself and for others. I don't know about you, but I feel with the morning that I had, where I was going to be pushing my car down the road, right? And running back from the car shop to get here, to get online with you. And the issues that we've had with some of the staff. I still think that we pulled it off. What do you think? We pull it off? Did we do
Yeah.
it?
We good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And crazy times, y'all.
Wild.
May I add one sentences for what I told before?
Yes.
Just because the non-Americans has the opportunity, freedom speak opportunity other than other countries. So we must cherish our situation and cherish our opportunity to express our own ideas, because this is comparatively not so risky as other country. So we are maybe in some situations risky, but it's not as risky as other countries. So cherish it and strive for that to shape this experience and express out.
And also understand that if we don't invoke those protections and rights, we lose them.
Yeah.
Right?
So cherish this opportunity. Yeah.
Well, Jenny, I think that's a great way to end. And all of you, I really appreciate your patience as we're moving forward and your attendance. You know, it's good to see you all here. I'm going to write down everybody who's in here before I get off, so I don't have to worry about that.
I am here, even though my camera's broken.
Oh, yeah, I know you're here. I didn't call on you that much,
Okay.
though. I'm sorry. Lou, before we hang up, is there anything else you want to say?
I can't think of anything really, except that in the podcast, I think was a really smart that she gathered her sources before taking on the professor, because without sources to back you up, it just turns into the same kind of argument you get on the internet every day, where it's just two people shouting opinions and there's no way to get anywhere from that kind of argument. So I think by that she really was smart to challenge the professor in a way so that anybody listening would understand that she was right, because she was the one with evidence, whereas he was just asserting his own opinion.
Right. And that works for the classroom and, you know, at large, you know. And as Cole said, we got to make sure that we got the right facts, because, you know, facts, I don't know, what's presented as facts changes quite often in this crazy world that we're in. Cole's like, yeah, it does. Yeah, right. I mean, last Monday we were going to be opening up our businesses, what, tomorrow? Isn't that right? So, you know, things do change. And, but all that being said, I won't see you again in a group setting until next Tuesday. But I will see you on the discussion board, and I have lots of office hours, so you can stop by for those as well. Carol?
I thought you said Tuesday, and I thought it was Monday.
Today's Monday. Yes, Mondays. I'm crazy. We're at same time, same.
No.
Another dollar.
No, everyone else was polite enough to just understand. I'm sorry to open my mouth.
Carol, I mean, I don't know why you're calling me out. Didn't we just have a conversation? No.
You know why you have work office time on Saturday? I'm wonder why you had work time on Saturday yesterday. Elisa?
What?
I received your email yesterday, but yesterday is Saturday. Saturday, why you on work time?
Oh, I worked 11 hours yesterday. I got 11 hours ahead of me today.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, y'all, as you know, I'll see you on the discussion board. I'll be in there communicating with you. You communicate with each other. You've got my phone number. You've got my email.
Thanks for your time.
You know, be kind to each other. Make good choices. Wash your hands. All right? Wash those hands. All right.
Thank you.
I'll see you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.